I have top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get our program started today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I am Rachel Paul with IAAP, and we're happy to have you here for our NeuroAbilities webinar focusing on implantable brain-computer interfaces and late-stage ALS real-world implications. Before we start our program today, I just have a few items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. You can select the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your screen. And today's webinar will be recorded and made available on the NeuroAbilities YouTube page, and we'll send out information regarding that afterwards. All microphones are muted from our attendees today to prevent any background noise or disruptions. And due to limited time today, we may not be able to get to everyone's questions, but we highly encourage you throughout today's presentation to leave your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And if we do not get to them, we will collect those and be sending them over to the NeuroAbilities team. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christopher Lee.
Thank you, Rachel. This is Christopher Lee, and we have a great presentation for you today. We have an hour, a lot of information all crammed into this hour. So as Rachel said, that we're going to do our best to get to some questions at the very end. Incredible panel that we have today. It is brought to you by G3ICT, NCAN, and IAAP. It's sponsored by the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. So thank you for the support to the foundation. We are just going to talk a little bit today to you about NeuroAbilities as a whole, and you'll learn a lot today. The project NeuroAbilities is focused on exploring the current state of solutions based on Neurotechnologies, BCIs, and AI to enable persons with disabilities and older persons to better interact with the environment. So you'll learn a lot today in regards to this subject matter. As I mentioned, my name is Christopher Lee. I will be navigating through this webinar today. And if you have any questions, as Rachel mentioned earlier, put those into the Q&A. We'll be trying to pull those in throughout the presentation if we have time. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, Jonathan Wolpaw. He is the National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnology, NCAN Director. Jonathan, welcome. And we have to say this one time, you have to get yourself off mute.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Christopher. I'm very happy to be able to moderate this panel today. In my experience, this is really a fairly unique experience because normally BCI discussions are quite speculative. They're kind of uplifting, but they deal with fairly non-specific issues about implanted technologies, about the potential ethics involved. And they're things for the future, really. They can be quite heady and enjoyable, but that's pretty much the whole of them, and that's pretty much where they end. This is different because this panel is very much focused on a fairly specific BCI technology and its specific application. So it really is an advance that we're now seeing technology, we're now seeing a BCI become really like any other therapy. And that's the way you'll largely see it addressed today. It has the same, it raises the same issues, the same kinds of ethical issues, practical issues, et cetera, as any other sort of new therapy. And this is really an advance. So it's kind of nice to see that happen, to deal with very specific issues. So we have a panel that's very well qualified to do that. I'll introduce now. We have Michael Gaytant from the University of Utrecht. He's spent a lot of time supporting, he's a physician at the Center of Home Mechanical Ventilation, knows a great deal about the support of people at the end of life, the support of people who need, have extreme neuromuscular disabilities and need ventilatory support, and the issues that are involved in their accepting it and using it. So he's extremely appropriate member of this panel. We have Dr. Klein, who's a neurologist in Seattle, and also a neuroethicist who has spent a lot of time thinking and writing about the issues involved, the ethical issues involved in BCIs, and the sorts of issues that we will be addressing today. So we're very happy to have him. We also have Dr. Zachary Simmons, who's from the University of Pennsylvania. He's a neurologist who's spent a lot of time working and caring for ALS patients, very much involved and very familiar with the issues that come up at the end of life, all the kinds of decisions that and the issues that would be related to the actual use of BCIs. We have also Dr. Ghislaine van Thiel, a neuroethicist in Utrecht, who has also spent time thinking and being very concerned about these issues related to the use of BCIs, implanted BCIs. And here we have the first real practical discussion, I think, of how a specific one will be integrated into the normal treatment plan. And finally, Mariska Vansteensel, also in Utrecht, who is sort of the center of this presentation because she's the one with the most direct experience in actually using this BCI and in giving it to people and seeing how it functions, and will be most familiar with the issues. So without further ado, Mariska will kind of present the core of what we'll be talking about today. What is this technology? What can it do? And then we can get into the issues that actually using it involve. So.
Okay, thank you, John. Christopher, if I can go to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, so I will be using this slide to very briefly introduce the topic of today. We'll be speaking about implantable brain-computer interfaces, devices that use brain signals to control a computer, such as, for example, a communication software package for people with late-stage ALS. And in the image that you see here, the Utrecht neuroprosthesis is shown. It consists of several parts. It has implanted electrodes, subcutaneous wires, and an implanted amplifier. And all these parts, I hope you can see my mouse, by the way, are completely invisible on the user. And there are some external parts, including the screen that presents the communication software. And we have shown that this device is able to provide people with late-stage ALS with a reliable way to communicate in their daily life. And the system does that by providing the user with a brain click, which is basically a mouse click that can be generated with the brain signals. And that can be used to control spelling software that is set to switch scanning mode. So communication in this way is not very fast, but it has shown to be really reliable. Also, the system offers a separate signal that can be used to quickly call a caregiver when attention is needed. And these functionalities are available to the user at their home in their daily life to communicate with their family and caretakers, both during the day and since recently also during the night, and without any required involvement of the research team. So it's the complete, basically independent of a research setting. It can work without us being needed. And we have learned that this device can, as such, offer a significant contribution to the quality of life of those individuals, of our study participants. And therefore, I think it's good to have this discussion today. John, you're muted.
All the panelists were presented ahead of time with a general question for Mariska to address, then we'll each spend about a minute addressing it. And it's basically, the question is, from your perspective, how do you envision that implantable BCIs, given their current capabilities, may affect the discussion about quality of life and end of life, late stage ALS, and what important issues do you see arising? So if we could start, I guess, with Aaron Klein.
Thank you. So I guess I envision the implantable BCI as just presented by Mariska as maybe shifting the conversation about interventions in ALS in a few different ways. The first is around kind of how to present the capabilities of these kind of BCI in a realistic way. I mean, this kind of a neuroprosthesis offers significant hope for people who may be justifiably worried or even terrified of sort of losing the ability to communicate their needs or just to interact in the way they want to with loved ones. But this is also a population that might be wary of hype and at times who might feel pressure from family, friends, or others to try new therapies. For who might hear that who might constantly be presented with the newest possible idea for helping in this really difficult disease, and so I think we also want to be thinking about kind of how to present these options to patients. And second, I think it raises some really interesting questions about timing. So whether or not that means you may have people who want to undergo the surgery for this very early and be able to maximize their ability to learn how to use the system. And that might involve having surgery even before they need to use the system, right? Versus people who might want to wait and sort of maximize their current quality of life and not undertake the risks of this sort of a system. So I think the timing question is going to be really important here. And finally, I think it just raises some really important questions about the role of family and caregivers in the decision to get this kind of a device. That it may make caregiving easier in some ways, harder in some ways, and individuals who get these devices, are often very concerned about what the burden that their disease places on family members, and so I think that's going to be a really important consideration here.
Dr. Gaytant, an initial brief statement.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah, well, my answer is in the same way like Aaron Klein, I guess. For what we know, many patients with ALS will lose their ability of speech, and especially in case of such a devastating disease like ALS, with all the emotional burden for the patients as well as for their loved ones, communication will be essential. And nowadays there are alternatives for speech, like speech computer, or in a later stage, the solutions which can convert eye movements into speech are the only available techniques. But if these techniques are not useful anymore due to progression or disease of the disease or due to comorbidity, then I think BCIs can be a solution. But what we see in daily practice is that just a few of our patients with ALS choose for tracheostomal ventilation. And that is the small group that can live for quite a long time, incidentally up to 10 years at this moment. I think that patients who do not choose for tracheostomal ventilation and therefore will not live for many years, the choice for a technique that will cost quite a long time for training is less suitable. So I think that in daily practice, there's just a very limited amount of patients with ALS who can live that long that they can lose their ability of using the available techniques and therefore could qualify for a BCI solution.
Okay, thank you. So we're clearly getting some of the main issues brought out. We'll go on to Dr. Van Thiel.
Okay, thank you. I think from an ethics perspective that at first sight, these BCIs provide something that a lot of people will want. From research that we know that people value independence, self-control, and communication, so that BCIs that provide this, at least some type of communication at first sight, are of indisputable value for quality of life. However, we also know by now that the relations between the values that people have that I just mentioned and the experience with actual neurotechnologies are quite complex, and they are also non-linear. And in the case of BCIs, the gain of more autonomy comes with the experience of a BCI as an indispensable part of the person, him or herself. and the need for an adaptation to the process, to the human and machine interaction, which can place quite a difficult burden also on ideas about identity and self of people. In addition, the technology itself, we try to make people more independent, but it creates other dependencies than that there were in the first place. So it may also create dependencies that were not there yet, and maybe are affect not only the patient but also the caregivers. Of course, the question, and I think Dr. Gaytant was also maybe referring to that this may not be for everybody, because prolonged living with severe disabilities may not add a lot to quality of life for everybody. I think what's currently not well addressed enough in the ethics literature is that how we can form a stepwise and watchful implementation of BCIs, making sure that we give this to the right people to maximize the benefits and to monitor the human experience that comes along with it. Thank you.
Dr. Simmons, that would be good. Thank you very much. But we can go on to Dr. Simmons.
Thank you. So, so my perspective when I look at this really comes from my experience as someone who cares for a number of people with ALS and who's thought about quality of life issues. And I think one important thing to keep in mind is that quality of life for people with ALS overall is not related primarily to physical function, but depends to a great degree on psychological, existential support, and some spiritual factors. So most individuals with ALS, has been pointed out here, in Europe and in North America, choose not to extend their lives via a tracheostomy and mechanical ventilation. And when you ask them about this, many respond that they believe the quality of their lives would be unacceptable. So part of that concern is being a burden to others. And there are also fears of surviving, but being unable to communicate, being in a locked in state. And that's where BCI really comes in. So an important question is really whether individuals with ALS might make a different choice about life-sustaining treatment if their lives were enhanced through BCI, particularly if BCI could facilitate not only communication, but also some degree of control over their environment and potentially reduce their perception that they are a burden to others. There are a couple other considerations I'd want to point out as well. Although the general concept of ALS is that it is exclusively a motor neuron disease, it turns out that with progression of ALS, more than half of affected individuals develop cognitive or behavioral impairments or both. And this may make it difficult or impossible at some point for them to effectively use a BCI, or they may learn to use a BCI, but then develop a frontotemporal dementia. And we then face the question, are they living the life that was their goal? I think another important question is that not all patients who are maintained on mechanical ventilation make this as a conscious choice. So some patients with ALS end up with tracheostomy and mechanical ventilation as a result of an emergent intubation situation, and their sudden loss of communication and complete dependence on others can be devastating. And some soon opt to have their life support discontinued as a result of that. That's something else that BCI might change.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mariska.
Yes, thank you. I agree with a lot that has been said before, especially the statement by Dr. Simmons that if we would be able to develop and validate the implantable BCIs further and make them available to clinicians to offer to their patients as a way to retain some level of communication, would that affect the choices that people would make concerning life-sustaining technology, invasive and non-invasive ventilation? And because especially this is important because also the BCI that we work with requires a surgery. So then another topic that is related to that would be about the timing and the order of those choices. And the considerations of each of those choices, should they start affecting each other or not? And is it even desirable that a BCI, an implantable BCI, a way to potentially communicate better, is it even desirable that that affects the discussion about life-sustaining technology or not? And what would be, another topic would be the conditions that would have to be met before someone would be eligible to receive a BCI. And specifically related to the topic that Dr. Simmons was already bringing up about cognition, for example. So yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on, I thought it would be good to add one other thing, that we're talking obviously about people with ALS and their particular issues, particularly because they're on a course which is continually developing. But there's a much larger population that could use these systems that really are simpler and are also a factor. Those include the large number of people severely disabled by cerebral palsy, as well as people with brainstem strokes and stable lesions. So we're talking about a good deal more than just ALS, but ALS brings up the basic issues that the others do and a bunch of additional issues. So with that sort of as additional background, I wanted to start out by asking Mariska directly, and others as well, but starting with Mariska, what steps do you still think need to be taken before your implantable BCI could be implemented clinically as a solution for communication impairment in late stage ALS? I mean, what are the practical issues if you're going to get from, say, 2 or 3 people implanted to 20 or 30 people implanted around the world in a financially and professionally and clinically supportable format? So it isn't a research endeavor, it's actually a clinical service.
Yes.
Self-supporting.
I think, well, the first step is that we demonstrate in more individuals for whom it works and for whom it doesn't work. There could be topics related to the etiology of the impairment that would be prohibitive or be benefiting the use of BCIs. So we have to know more about that. The other thing is that we have to have the availability of the technology in an affordable way. So we will be dependent on companies that make them and that will, continue providing the support and replacements if they're needed. And apart from that, I think that we will need to have many discussions also about the value of BCIs and about the topics that we're talking about today with the clinicians involved in the treatment of BCIs, about the timing and about who should be advising on this. And of course, another important topic will be health insurance coverage, hopefully.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to add to that? That's really very practical issues. Okay.
I think that
Zachary.
I'm sorry. I think that one other thing to consider in addition to the important points that Mariska brought out is ease of use from a point of view of the patient and the caregiver, and ability to train them to train an individual and a caregiver who have very limited mobility. So I think that not only ultimately are we looking for something that people find that they can develop skills with in a reasonable period of time for people without special training, but also ways for those who are experts in this to be able to provide that training. And that could be done remotely, for example, in some ways, although there'll certainly have to be some hands-on as well in terms of just working with the equipment itself.
So do you see this becoming financially, commercially supportable as a regular treatment? Is that, I mean, clearly it's a difficult problem. Is how difficult do you see it? The support seems to me a major issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question. I mean, we've if you go back a number of years, eye gaze systems were extremely expensive, and augmentative communication devices were extremely expensive, and training was a bit difficult. And now, for those who have good use of their hands, you can just take your computer, type something, and produces a voice. And so things have, and the eye gaze systems have come a long way as well. But in terms of the feasibility of this, I'm afraid I don't know enough about the technology itself to know what sort of barriers there are to make this more feasible. Perhaps other members of the panel would be more knowledgeable about that.
Well, I can say a little bit about this. We've of course have discussions. We've had discussions about this, and it seems because as we was stated before, not all individuals with significant motor impairment will choose to have an implantable BCI. So the population is not extremely large. So it may be a financially attractive solution if we can make use of devices that are developed for other purposes and that we just repurpose for this specific BCI application. And in that way, it could be a commercially interesting way to accomplish this. Having said that, of course, support after someone has had the implant, the training, customer support, etc., is something that we have to think about as well. I'm not sure how to ideally do this, but I can imagine that rehab specialists and related disciplines could play a role in this. Dedicated BCI specialists in the rehab department or so.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment about that?
Can I make a remark? Michael Gaytant here. Because the amount of patients that can qualify for such a solution will stay very small, I guess, because there are alternatives. Like you mentioned, the patients with brainstem problems, we do not see that they have problems because the alternatives, that eye movements you can convert into speech, is also available technique for those kind of patients. Also with the almost locked in ALS patients. But if they have problems with their eye movements, what we not see with patients with brainstem problems, perhaps in case of patients with cerebral palsy, then the BCI can be a solution. But that's, yeah, I guess very because of the fact that it's a small amount of patients, it's commercially not very attractive.
Indeed, not if a BCI would be developed specifically for this purpose, but if we could make use of implantable amplifiers that serve also other purposes, it could solve part of that problem.
But at the same time, it does have potential advantages even over. I mean, I in my understanding, eye movement systems at this point are the major competition, and will basically are part of the reason that the population for BCIs at the moment is going to be small. But at the same time, a system like the one that Mariska has been using doesn't co-opt the eyes. It doesn't require that the lights be on and you're looking at something. It doesn't require external technology or you to be in proximity to something. It does have potential advantages. Now, obviously, it's got disadvantages too, but there are, if it becomes easily usable, easily implantable, then you could see it becoming competitive and maybe more than competitive with eye movement systems. Do other people, Aaron or Ghislaine, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think always with these technologies, the one hurdle is always acceptance in clinical practice too. So not only the patient, but also the neurologist will have to accept this as a viable option and an attractive option for patient. And they will also have to, and it has been mentioned before, think about how are we going to present this to patients in order to also be able to give this treatment to the right patients and not generate expectations that are maybe too good to be true to other patients, or things like that. And I think this is not only a principle, but also a practical issue which need to be resolved.
Yeah, that brings up the issue that technologies like this, it's a lot more difficult than it is in terms of developing like the right drug regime for a patient. That you can't just switch technologies the way you switch anti-epileptic drugs, or because each one requires an investment on the part of the patient and the caregiver and a training procedure, et cetera. So that's one reason why it's really hard to do controlled studies in this area. But so that's an issue that you really, I would think, want to get a technology that's formatted for that person. And that involves the clinician and some evaluation. So in many ways, the kind of the drug model doesn't really translate here, and it becomes a much more complex issue. I wonder if anyone has any comments about that or any ways to address it.
I think the only thing we should do is really demonstrate the potential added value in more individuals. I think also if you think about the target population, the size of the target population, adding more functionality or having faster communication than we currently can accomplish with a single brain click may also be perceived as more benefit for more individuals, but we're obviously not there yet.
I think also the driver for this, to some degree, as Mariska mentioned earlier, I think has to be some of the other healthcare professionals who work with the physicians on this, because I think that just as we rely on our speech language pathologists to help us with communication issues with existing equipment, I think that as interested as many physicians are in giving their patients options and making things available to them, it would be very difficult to make most of those doctors very familiar with the extensively detailed technology that's involved in something such as this. So I think that in some way, physicians would have to be able to tap into a network that of experts where the physician, their patient, and those experts could make some sort of shared decision-making process, and whether something will work well. Because I think that without that triad, it's wrong decisions could be made that might not be in the patient's best interest.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, I have very limited experience with patients of this kind, but I mean, it seems clear that each one of them is a unique entity. And not only that, that you really, for patients who survive, particularly with ALS, there's a mini society around them that's unique for each person, involving their family members, their friends, their support system, their financial limitations or abilities. So it seems like you really need to integrate anything like this assistive communication technology into that environment, and you really need the awareness of that to do this properly. Does anyone have any thoughts on that, or
I think a clinical implementation of implantable BCIs will most likely require dedicated specialists close to the rehab department or so that indeed work closely with neurologists in doing a very individual specific tailored matching of assistive devices, including potentially BCI, to an individual and their situation.
So going on to another area, what factors play a role, this is particularly for the clinicians, in the end-of-life decisions? I mean, I understand that the last number I heard in the US, that 90% of people make a decision not to accept long-term ventilation. I understand that in Japan, it's a much smaller percent that don't decide to accept it. But what are the primary factors in terms of, besides, I mean, communication has been mentioned, quality of life, and how might a BCI extending the assistive communication spectrum, how could it affect those decisions? Do you see it as a factor in those decisions, and is it something you introduce pretty early, or that you introduce fairly late into the discussions? So, Dr. Gaytant or Dr. Simmons?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. In the Netherlands, a lot of patients with ALS choose long-term mechanical ventilation, but the main amount of that patients choose just for non-invasive ventilation. So they will live for, well, 1 to 3 years at most. There's just a little group that decides to go for tracheostomal ventilation. So they have the time to develop the problems with their speech and also lost the ability to use the other techniques like the eye movement computer. And what Professor Simmons already stated, that's my worry, that just those patients who live long with ALS can develop cognitive impairment like frontotemporal dementia. So that can also play a role in the decision to choose to stay alive and choose for a BCI. But they can lose their insight in the disease, and that can also play a part in if it's a well-taken decision or not. That's my concern.
So do you typically find that people, I mean, is it practical, is it productive, is it useful to sort of lay out the course at the beginning of the disease for the person and think of the possibilities, or do you wait to some extent to see what's going to happen with that particular person, the rate of progression, etc.?
Well, because there are alternatives at this moment, that when these alternatives are not useful anymore, then you have to make the decision to choose for a BCI. But most of the patients will stop their treatment and stop ventilation before reaching that moment. If you say start early, one of our patients who can use his eyes and can use his eye the computer that he can use with his eyes, he likes technological gimmicks. So he was interested in a BCI, and he has the time to learn the BCI. But he can also communicate with his computer by his eyes. So he has the time. And that's an advantage, I guess, but that he's an exception, I guess.
So, yes, Dr. Simmons.
So this, I think a really important question that you, John, asked is when do you begin these discussions with our patients? And Michael alluded to that as well. And I think that that's really a key issue, because it's and I'd be very interested to hear what other panelists have to say, but of course, different patients are interested in beginning this discussion at vastly different times in their clinical course. Some people on day one, some people never, and most people somewhere in the middle. But I think that at any point that we would begin a discussion, it's always that of goals of care. You know, what is the patient's goal? What are they looking for? And once we establish what their goals of care are, and what's important for their quality of life, what they're looking for, then I think that the introduction or not of something like BCI is a natural part of that discussion, just as the introduction of mechanical ventilation or other life-sustaining equipment is.
Okay, so Dr. Klein, do you go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I would just echo that and say that, you know, I think connecting back to an earlier discussion about sort of quality of life, I mean, I think part of what why prescribers, neurologists or others are going to be so important here with respect to understanding what the quality of life is in late stage ALS, is if they are going to lead these discussions about BCI early in the course of disease, they're going to need to have a good sense of what quality of life is late in the disease. And I think, you know, there's evidence that probably many of the people on the panel know that people with ALS often judge their quality of life higher than both clinicians and the general public. And so so I think in part it's important that neurologists and others understand the technologies so that they can understand its capabilities and be able to advise potential users, but also a better understanding for some of what quality of life is at the end of or later in the stage of the disease. The other thing I wanted to just quickly talk about is the dementia component. You know, there is an analogy to deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, in that Parkinson's disease is a disease that many people, or a significant proportion, will develop dementia in the course of the disease, and it's usually considered a contraindication to getting deep brain stimulation, but many people will develop dementia in the course of their Parkinson's with a deep brain stimulator, and so these are issues that the medical community has already started to grapple with, and so there are sort of lessons to be drawn from that population.
Okay. Dr. Thiel, you had a question? Or
yeah, well,
comment?
if I may add that these discussions may be new for people with late-stage ALS in the context of BCIs, but they are not, of course, in the context of clinical practice of end-of-life care. So this is something probably that has to be adapted to the specific situation. But for example, also discussions about limiting, for example, ICU treatment also has all these same issues of, do people really know what they are going to be deciding about, and is this going to be relevant in the future? And I think there's a body of knowledge also there of how this could be done that could be also repurposed, so to say, for this context.
Okay, do we have other comments? Okay, one question, I guess for Doctors Klein and Van Thiel, and for the others as well, do you see that there are unique ethical issues involved with BCIs? I mean, most of what we're talking about are not unique issues. They're standard risk-benefit sorts of issues, and that's good, I guess. But are there unique issues that BCIs bring up that we should be aware of, start thinking about?
So I think it's a great point.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, then I think that at a certain level of principles and values that these issues are already known and can also be compared to other parts of medicine and treating patients at the end of life. However, the use of a BCI does transform several questions that are more classical ethical issues. For example, the fact that how much does autonomy contribute to quality of life? How is this in the specific case of BCIs? These are all questions that may sound very familiar, but really need to be researched very well in order to get the right answers for this typical practice.
Yeah, and sort of adding to that, I think so I think a lot of the issues here are present in one way or another in other areas of medicine and bioethics. I think one area that does seem to be a little bit different is the notion of sort of mental integrity and privacy. That, you know, there may be ways in which, you know, when we don't want to say something we have the choice to not speak it. And you know, when you have a technology that is trying to interpret brain activity and combined with artificial intelligence in a way to sort of speed up that communication, there are ways in which one may have things revealed about what one is thinking, or one's that one may be concerned about, and I think we may need to think real carefully about how we allow people to have control and maintain an area of privacy around this communication. So I think there's this trade-off of sort of independence and control versus sort of revealing and privacy.
So
I agree that that's an important topic, but I also I want to bring up that we are quite far from people being able to by accident share their thoughts without intentionally wanted to say something. Of course, the system can make a mistake, and that's another issue that should be, of course, thought about. Who's responsible if that mistake has major consequences.
okay, one sort of connected question, which I find very interesting related to that, is if you use a BCI, if someone is totally dependent on a BCI and you use it to make for the person to make an end of life decision, you can, obviously, if the answer is always one way, completely consistent, that's okay. But if you get one answer one point and a different answer another point, either normally, if it were a normal communication channel, you would conclude the person is ambivalent. But in this case, you may have a defective BCI. And I really don't know at this point how you would even address that question. I don't know if anyone has any comment on that, but that one that raises interest.
Well, I would be very interested in how that, maybe Ghislaine, you could say something about it, how that is done in other situations where people express ambivalence or so about the end of life.
I mean, I think a lot of it involves around the consistency of a response, and because for all major decisions, the physician would undoubtedly be querying the patient about those decisions a number of times before proceeding with a specific course, whether it's tracheostomy or feeding tube or ending life support or something like that. So while I appreciate that the one could be concerned about whether there's a technical glitch, so to speak, that's interfering with the response, I would hope that any devices that we're using would be at a level where if a response were the same 9 times and different once, that one could sort of take that the same way that we do when patients at one time or another express some ambivalence.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
And
potentially.
I think so. The question is, of course, whether the ambivalence maybe has other underlying factors, such as the dementia that was mentioned. Maybe is the patient still competent to make this type of decision? Is the ambivalence still coming from an autonomous person or not anymore? These are, of course, difficult questions. However, I also think that in dealing with patients who are in the gray area, so to say, between being autonomous and being incompetent, most physicians are trained and most caregivers also are trained to not only look at cognitive and cognitive language, but also other circumstances of the patients which should be weighed in the final idea about whether this is whether the the people surrounding the patient are convinced that a certain decision is what the patient really wants. And in some cases, we can never be sure. But under that circumstance, a BCI might help instead of making things more difficult.
Yeah, this is not exactly the same topic, but of course, when asking patients for consent that have very limited communication ability to participate in studies, of course, we also have to validate their answer in multiple ways. And I guess that these approaches probably share some similarities with the approaches that could be used for the end of life decisions.
Okay, thank you. I think now we should go on to some questions from the audience.
Hi, this is Rachel, and we have quite a few. So one question in particular was asking about the procedure itself. If you could walk through that to help someone understand that, how invasive is it, and what are the care needs afterwards?
Yeah, I can say something about it. Obviously, this is a neurosurgical procedure, and the implant as we have it now involves drilling small burr holes in the skull and leading the electrodes through those burr holes on the surface of the brain, and then leads the wires subcutaneously to the chest area, where the implantier is then implanted in a pocket. And that is a similar procedure as that is used for TVS or pacemaker devices. So in that sense, we're not making there is not necessary to make big openings in the skull. It's relatively small. Our patients recover well from this procedure, and quite quickly they can go home after the procedure.
Okay, thank you. In regards to quality of life and how patients often say their quality of life is better than what we assume, how can we get people with any given condition involved in deciding how we'd ask about their quality of life?
I'm not a quality of life expert, but I do know that that there have been investigations into the type of surveys you would use for this population to question their quality of life. And I know that there is differences, but Erin may be more capable of answering these questions. There's of course differences in the types of measures that you use to validate the quality of life in terms of physical abilities or emotional, psychological aspects. I know that there's dedicated surveys for people with ALS.
Yeah, there are a number of ALS specific quality of life instruments. There are also generic quality of life instruments that have been adapted for and used in the ALS patient population. Most of those, certainly those instruments haven't been trialed in people using brain-computer interfaces, but they have been used in large numbers of people with ALS, and assuming that the response system were reliable with the brain-computer interface, I don't know any reason that those established questionnaires couldn't be used in the same way, either for somebody who is using BCI or in querying people about quality of life and their expectations even prior to them making a decision about the device. The idea of which people have many different opinions on, but I think that the question, can it be measured with this patient population? I would say sure.
Thank you, Zachary. And another question, would possible morphological changes in the cortex that occur with the disease progression require the implantable BCI to be relocated?
That's a difficult question. I think that given the evidence we've seen so far, we're quite capable, but having said that, we need to validate this in more patients. We can estimate the ability of people to activate the brain areas that we have as a target location for the electrodes with non-invasive measures. So before the surgery, we have tools to measure the electrical activity in the brain, and that is informative on the chance of success of a BCI. Having said that, we've implanted a limited number of people yet, and we have to learn more about this because it is a little bit complex. And the other thing I wanted to say is that the patients we have implanted so far, they were late stage ALS. So most likely, most of the cortical changes that are associated with disease have already taken place because they're already quite far into the disease.
I think that answers one of the questions I was going to go to next. Let's see. A question about insurance. For those outside of the US, is your medical insurance system paying for BCI? As I said, I can't imagine USA medical insurance is wanting to pay for the implant, and there could be an ethical issue.
I don't think anyone knows the answer to this question yet. I'm not aware of any BCI that has been proposed to an insurance company yet. We may have to start that discussion, in time. And otherwise, this really may be an ethical issue, of course, because having a surgical procedure and having it not covered by insurance will cause important differences in chances between individuals with different socioeconomic backgrounds.
At the same time, the case could be made that the BCI might reduce the ongoing care costs. So that could potentially be an argument with the insurance companies.
That would be a good argument. Yes.
I think we're getting close to the top of the hour here. Maybe we'll do one more question and have Christopher come back on and share some more information. Let's see, people with ALS are unique, even though they share the same diagnosis. Do you envision that the application for BCI will be customized to each person with ALS? And how do you match patient expectations with BCI capability?
In terms of answering the second question, I think it's very important that we keep communicating with the community about what BCIs can and cannot do. That we as researchers share an honest story and be very reluctant in hyping things, let's stay away from that. And I kind of forgot the first question, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was scrolling up, make sure. Do you envision that the application for BCI will be customized to each person?
Not necessarily, I would say. We may learn that people may have different preferences in the type of mental activity they produce to activate the brain signals that we need to control the BCI. But I think in general, there is no fundamental reason why we should have a fundamental difference between individuals. There may be smaller detailed differences, of course, of the training procedures, etc. But no fundamental differences now.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we'll wrap up with questions there. There are so many great ones and comments in here, so we'll be sure to save these and pass these along to the panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and let Christopher close out our program today.
Yeah, I want to thank the panelists. It was excellent, a very fascinating conversation. As Teresa mentioned in her comments in the chat, we could have could have gone on for a much longer webinar today. So hopefully we'll circle back around to this topic. Again, thank you, panelists. I want to thank NCAN for participating and John for moderating. I definitely want to make sure that everyone knows that we have an incredible sponsor. The Patrick J. Government Foundation has been sponsoring the NeuroAbility project. I want to thank our team, the G3 ICT team, and our captionist. You can follow us on Twitter at G3 ICT, as well as you can hashtag NeuroAbilities. On next Save the Date, calendar Save the Date webinar is going to be on cochlear implants. It's going to be on February 25th of this year. So again, thank you everyone, and take care and have a good evening, a good afternoon, or good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.